So I'd been renting a place with my friend for a few years. It was great, and having my friend as a roommate, it split the costs down the middle and it was easy to cover. Also, having someone you know and get along with as a roommate it's the best. So when my friend and his long-term girlfriend decided to move in together, it was a shock at first as I enjoyed living with him. But then came the realization I needed a new roommate to help cover the costs of living there. I wanted to act fast as I couldn't keep paying for it all on my own, so I used online services to advertise for a roommate. It didn't take long for interest to come in, and that is when I met Louise. Louise was 28 years old, Hispanic, who seemed down to earth, and he was very keen on renting. At the time, he told me he needed to find himself a place urgently for work purposes, so he had no problem paying up front in cash. I wanted to interview a few people interested in the room first, but when he said he was willing to pay now and in cash, well, that was music to my ears as there was upcoming payments due. So wanting the process done myself, and I thought, why not? And that is when Louise became my new roommate. The initial move-in period was fast. Louise didn't have a lot of stuff. The first night was fine. Louise seemed to settle in well. I remember asking him the next day how he slept and how his first night was. He said it was great, that he'd settled in well and he hadn't such a good night's sleep in a while. Fair enough, I thought. It was good to hear, and I was just glad that I'd found a roommate to help split the costs. It wasn't until the next night something weird happened. I was sitting watching the TV when Louise came home. He went straight to his room and shut himself in. I remember asking if everything was okay, to which I got a muffled response that everything was fine and that he was just tired. Leaving him to it, I went back to watching TV for the rest of the night until heading to bed myself. It was later that night I woke up to something that had caused me to break my sleep. I checked the time and could see it was near enough to 3 a.m. in the morning. I wasn't sure what woke me until I sat there and the silence was broken. I listened to what grabbed my attention, and it was then I could hear a knocking at my door. And now, this wasn't like somebody was knocking on my door, but more like something was knocking against my door, like a thud motion. I didn't know what it was, about to get up to see what it could be when the sound changed. It went from a knocking to a scratching sound towards the bottom of my door. I could then see the outline of movement from the bottom of the door, a shadow moving as the scratching continued. Now, I don't have any pets, nor did Louise, and with only the two of us living there, I thought, what the hell was that? The only thing I could think to do was to call out, so I was too creeped out to open the door straight away. As I called out a hello, the scratching slowly stopped, kind of like it heard me. I called out, Louise, is that you out there? I was met with silence for a good half of a minute as I stood up when the sound of thumping began to echo up and down the hallway. As if somebody was galloping up and down the hallway past my room, scared the crap out of me. I moved closest to my door and I placed my hand on the doorknob. The galloping soon stopped, and as I pressed my ear to the door, it was then I heard another door shut down the hallway. Silence then filled the room as all I could hear was my pulse racing. I slowly opened my door as I poked my head out into the hallway to see that it was empty. I looked over at Louise's door and I could see that the door handle was slowly reaching its original position. That must have been Louise in the hallway, I thought to myself. But what the fuck was he doing? And why was he knocking and scratching at my door? I closed my door, making sure it was locked, and I went back to bed, not really sleeping much after that. The next day, when I was making food for work, Louise came into the kitchen saying good morning and making conversation. Now, I thought as we were talking, this was the perfect moment to ask him about last night. So I did. Without trying to be too blunt, I asked, "Hey, were you outside my bedroom door last night, knocking and walking past my door?" I left out the scratching at the time, but I don't know why. He stopped what he was doing as he looked at me, as if shocked or if I was the weird one, as he said no, it wasn't him, and wondered why I was asking. I told him what I had heard outside my door, and he straight up denied it, saying he wasn't quite sure what I was talking about. After that, the awkward silence filled the room as I finished making my food. I said goodbye as I headed to work. I questioned myself all day that day, thinking maybe at first I was dreaming it, but I knew what I had heard and saw and knew I was awake. I knew the difference between a dream and reality. Later that evening, after arriving back after work, I was again back before Louise. The house was empty. He arrived back shortly after me, and again we had minimal conversation before he headed off into his room. I thought maybe it was a one-off and I was overthinking things. Maybe he was a sleepwalker and he didn't realize it. I settled in for the night before heading to bed myself at around midnight that night, and I made sure my door was locked. Hoping it was a one-off, I was wrong, as again I was awoken that night to the sound of the same thuds against my door. As I sat up and listened, I couldn't believe it. What the hell was going on? And that is when my doorknob started to rattle, as if somebody was trying to get into my room. I shouted, "Louise, is that you out there? What are you doing?" The rattling suddenly stopped. I sat up as I stared at the door. As I stood to walk over to it, it was then I heard a clang in the hallway, followed by the sound of something sliding and creaking. Followed by more weird creaking sounds in the hallway. I couldn't put up with this, and I had to see what the hell was going on. I slowly opened my door looking out into the hallway, and I saw that Louise's bedroom door was open, and as I looked up to the other side of the hallway, it was then a nervous feeling washed over me. I saw that attic wide open with the ladder down, as if someone was up in the attic in the pitch black. I slowly stepped into the hallway as at this point I was freaked out. I looked towards the attic as I looked up, calling Louise's name, asking if he was up there. I got no reply. I looked back at his room and he wasn't in there. I didn't know what the hell was going on. As I stood closer to the ladder, looking up into the pitch black abyss of the attic above me, it was then the silence broke as the floorboards creaked above me. My heart racing, I called out Louise's name again and again and again, and I was met with deadly silence. This time I shouted his name, asking what the fuck he was doing. As I leaned closer, there was no way I was going up there. It was then I heard something dripping, as if like the sound of a leaky tap dripping. I noticed something had dripped onto the ladder. I quickly reached for the hallway light, as finally light was brought into the room, but to my horror, I saw the red blood-like substance that had been dripping down out of the attic. I looked back up to the attic one more time as I saw a pair of white eyes staring down at me from the darkness. That was enough for me as I bolted back to my room, locking the door as I grabbed my phone, calling the police. I couldn't get my words out fast enough as I told them what was happening and about the roommate and seemingly blood coming out of my attic. They said dispatch was en route. I heard the sound of clamoring in the hallway as if Louise had descended out of the attic, and I heard him running to his room. Seconds later, the sound of him running through the house and out the front door. I couldn't bring myself to come out of my room straight away, just in case. I waited until the police arrived, and when they did, what we found was not what I expected, but more terrifying than what I thought. No, it wasn't blood I saw dripping from the attic, but red paint. And when Louise's room was searched, to my shock, there were satanic red symbols painted all over the walls. As the police checked the attic, it was the same up there. It seemed he had begun to paint a symbol on the floor of the attic. I have no idea what he was doing, but it was clearly something satanic, and I truly believe he had planned to have me be a part of whatever he was doing. I'm lucky I woke up and caught him when I did. I couldn't give the police much to go by as I didn't know where Louise came from before he roomed with me. All I had was his name, and I hadn't done my job properly and done the correct procedure and background checks and whatnot. Letting him pay cash to get a quick roommate, it was my own fault. A mistake I will never make again. That night will always haunt me. I never saw Louise after that, and the police never really pursued the case. I soon moved out of that place, moving to a cheaper one, someplace I felt like I didn't have to sleep with one eye open. So, if you're considering getting a roommate, please make sure you go through the correct protocol and know who you're inviting into your home. I had recently moved into an apartment close to my university. It was vacant, and myself and another guy were moving in at the same time. We were both there for the same thing, closer to the university we were attending. When I moved in, it was the first time I'd met Adam. He seemed to be a nice, quiet guy and kept to himself, which was cool with me. We had a few drinks together and interesting conversations on a few nights, and we got to know each other a little bit, but nothing major. Most of the time we were passing ships throughout our stay. About a week into moving in, I arrived home one evening, and as I entered my room, I put my stuff down and I was getting ready to take a shower. But as I looked around, I noticed straight away things had been moved around my room. Items where I'd not usually leave them, like my iPad, not on charge where I usually left it. Instead, it was on the end of my bed, and my bed looked like somebody had been laying on it. My wardrobe was open as if somebody had been rummaging through it. I knew that I had left my iPad on my bedside table that morning, and my wardrobe was closed before I left the house. I knew someone had been in my room. I checked, but nothing was missing or had been taken. But clearly, someone had been in there, and with only me and Adam living there, he had to have been the one that was in my room. I called out to him, knocking on his door, but he didn't seem to be home. I had to ask him the question, as it wasn't okay, him going through my room and going through my property. That evening when he arrived home, I straight up asked him if he had been in my room that day, as things had been moved and it was like someone had looked through my stuff. He looked at me with a straight face and denied that he'd ever gone through my room, and he didn't know what I was talking about, asking if I was sure I didn't just leave my iPad on the bed and forget to shut my wardrobe. I told him I was certain that wasn't the case. He then said, did I leave my window open for anyone to get through? I told him I hadn't, and that if he had been in my room to just tell me the truth. Again, he denied it as if I was crazy. We ended that conversation with an awkward silence, but I couldn't really prove he'd been in my room. I had no evidence it was him, although in my gut, I knew that it was. That night, as I slept, I woke up to the creaking of my door. And as I looked up, my door was open. I always shut my door too, and you would physically have to pull the handle down to take it off the latch to open it. I turned on the light as I got up, looking around my room. It was empty. I looked out into the hallway and over to Adam's room. His door was shut. Had he again come into my room, or was I being paranoid? And did I actually not shut my door properly? I got a weird feeling as I headed back to my bed. I knew in my mind I had shut my door and that I needed to trust my gut. Needless to say, I didn't sleep much that night. constantly thinking if Adam had been in my room that night. Then a day later, the same thing had happened again. I arrived home and things had been moved around. My shoes and trainers had all been swapped around my shoe rack. It looked as if items had been moved around under my bed. I again went straight to speak to Adam, but again he denied ever stepping foot in my room, and he laughed at me. He called me crazy. And this really angered me. I knew this guy was messing with me. I was not imagining these things, and I told him if it happened again, I would be reporting him. That evening, I ordered myself a wireless mini camera for next day delivery. I had to know what was going on, and I had to catch him in the act. My plan was to set up and hide the camera and record my room all day, and then when I get back that night, I'd be able to watch back and see if he indeed had been in my room. The next day, it finally arrived. I set it up, hiding it on a top shelf to get a full view of the room. If anything was going to happen, I would have it recorded now. With it in place and out of view to the naked eye, I left for the day. With it being a Friday, after I'd finished all my studies, I was heading out with some friends, so I wouldn't be back until late, and I'd watch through the footage later that evening. I arrived back a little bit later than expected. When I got back, I saw Adam's door was already shut. I called out to see if he was home, but I got no reply. Heading to my room, my first task was to look back throughout the daily footage. I sat on my bed and played back from when I had set it up. I saw myself leaving, then slowly skipped through the footage, and as I did, around the afternoon, I saw on the footage my bedroom door open, and it was Adam walking into my room. I knew it. I knew I was right. As I watched him standing in the middle of my room, as he looked around, he began to undress. As I watched, he took off his clothes and opened my wardrobe, putting on a pair of my pants and a t-shirt, where he then laid down on my bed. I watched in shock, thinking, what the fuck? It was then I couldn't believe what I saw. He began touching himself as he lay on my bed before rubbing a hand across my pillow. He then opened the bottle of water I had next to my bed and proceeded to spit in it, shaking it and then putting it back. I could not believe what I was watching. After putting my clothes back, he left my room. Sitting in shock, I continued to forward the footage. I couldn't move at the time, so I just kept playing, feeling the anger inside of me. As I was about to get up, on the footage, my bedroom door opened again. Adam had returned, looking around my room again. It was dark at this point. Looking at the time, I noticed this was 15 minutes before I had just returned. As the footage played, I saw Adam turn, opening my wardrobe and getting inside, closing the door behind him. A minute or so later, the footage showed me walking into the room. My blood ran cold as the situation dawned on me. Adam was in my wardrobe right at that moment as I sat on my bed. My heart raced as the anger I had felt turned into a mixture of fear. As I slowly turned my head, looking at my wardrobe, it was slightly ajar. I didn't know what to do as my pulse raced. This freak was sitting in my wardrobe as I sat there. He could see me. As the surge of adrenaline kicked in, I stood up as I shouted his name, telling him that I knew he was in my wardrobe and for him to get the fuck out. I had seen what he'd been doing in my room. My words were met with silence. As I slowly began to hear the sound of heavy breathing coming from inside the wardrobe, I shouted again as I walked towards it. It was then, suddenly, the door swung open as Adam screamed, lunging at me. I stepped back in shock as he grabbed me as we fell to the floor. He quickly jumped up, running out of my room and out of the apartment. I called the police and reported everything. When they arrived, I showed them the footage I had captured. With Adam nowhere to be seen, they took my statement before leaving, saying as we occupied the same space and lived in the same apartment, They couldn't really arrest him for entering my room, but they could charge him for assault as he did attack me before fleeing. That night, I decided to stay at a friend's as I just didn't feel comfortable there anymore. The next day, upon returning to my place, I walked in and saw Adam's room was open. His room was empty. He'd been back, and it looked as though he had collected all of his stuff. I never saw Adam again after that night. Not even around the university, it was like he had just vanished. The stuff he was doing in my room was sick, and he clearly had some issues. After that experience, you can bet I got a lock installed on my room anywhere I rented after that. You just don't really know what goes on in people's heads. Just a quick one, guys. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed these disturbing stories. Why don't you comment down below which one would have terrified you the most if it were you in that situation. Also, don't forget to subscribe just over to the left and look out for plenty more upcoming content by hitting that bell button. If you can, like, comment, and share. It really helps us out, and I really appreciate it a lot, you guys. Let us know what story subjects you'd be interested in hearing soon in upcoming videos. And thanks again. Take care out there, and remember, fear lies within.